remarks that are standard for a meeting that's being held remotely like this. I'm going to go ahead and start, and I think people will probably join through this statement here. So welcome to the May 19th JFAC, a Joint Facilities Advisory Commission, and APS FAC, Facilities Advisory Committee meeting. We do this annually where we talk about the CIPs. For the safety of our JFAC and FAC members, staff, and participating community members, we're holding a virtual meeting today. All participants with us are joining remotely. We are legally authorized to hold this virtual meeting based on the governor's executive orders, legislation adopted by the Virginia General Assembly, the school board's continuity of operations resolutions, and the county board's continuity of operations ordinance. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few specifics about how our meeting tonight will run. Tonight's meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the JFAC website. The meeting is available to stream from the JFAC website via a Microsoft Teams link. There is also a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. If members, presenters, or speakers lose internet connectivity during today's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones and devices muted until you're called upon. Turn off sound to any other devices around you, please, to minimize interference. For everyone joining us on Teams, please turn off your video feed if you're not speaking. I will address when it's appropriate to turn it on in a moment. When called upon to speak, please unmute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon that is located on your meeting command bar. The moderator does not have the ability to unmute you. And if you are dialing in by phone, you press *6 to unmute. For our commissioners, if JFAC or FAC members wish to be recognized to speak on an item, please use one of the three following methods to be recognized. Use the raise hand feature within Teams, ask to be recognized using the chat box, or you can turn your video feed on and leave your microphone muted until you've been recognized. Once you've completed speaking, please turn your video feed back off. Do we have any commission members for either commission who are joining us by phone today? Okay, good. Then you shouldn't have any issues making it known that you want to be recognized throughout the meeting. Additional notes for public speakers. If you are not a member of the JFAC or FAC, we welcome you to our meetings because they are public meetings. A public comment will be taken at approximately 8:40 p.m. tonight. And at that time, I will ask members of the public who wish to be recognized to unmute and state their name. And we ask speakers to limit their comments to 3 minutes. Lastly, this is a public forum. All information associated with today's meeting, whether it's written or spoken, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requirements, which also means that the chat will be made public. All right, so there's the disclaimers. And again, I just want to welcome everyone. And I understand we have a special guest tonight. We have several guests, but we have a special guest tonight, and that would be Mr. Marcus Gregory, who is the new Assistant Superintendent of Facilities. I believe that's your title, right? It is in a moment we're going to invite you to talk to us for a minute about introduce yourself and talk to us maybe about your first few days, I guess, on the job. Before that, John Giambalvo, did you want to greet the group as well?
Thank you for having us and arranging this joint meeting. We did this, I did it for the first time with you all 2 years ago on pre-pandemic, and I thought it was a great meeting. We learned a little bit more about the county priorities from an APS perspective, but also opportunity to talk more about APS priorities. It was very helpful as some of the questions really helped us focus on really what our priorities were going forward. We're in a very different environment, and if anything, this is more important. So I look forward to talking a little bit about APS and hearing a little bit about the county. I know they're a little bit APS is a little bit further along in terms of putting forth the CIP. I think the county just came out yesterday, but it would be good for APS to hear a bit about where the county is now. So I'm looking forward to this meeting and thank everyone for joining.
Thanks so much. Mr. Gregory, welcome. We are very excited to have you here with us tonight, and we would love to, again, to welcome you and to just hear a little bit about yourself and your first few days.
Definitely, and I'd like to thank everyone for allowing me the opportunity to join your group tonight. I've heard some outstanding things about the great work that's being done. And issues that are being tabled by this particular group, but also the many other groups that I've been a part of for the first 3 weeks within the district. It's been a whirlwind tour, I think, coming from Seattle after 3.5 years with the Shoreline School District there, which is a bedroom school district for the city of Seattle. I've had an opportunity to get back to home soil. I'm a native of Virginia Beach, Virginia. So an opportunity to get back, get reacquainted to a lot of family and friends here in the area. Arlington is an area that, of course, growing up in Virginia Beach, you had an opportunity to come here for many field trips, growing up and going through the ranks of the public school district there in Virginia Beach, Virginia. So it's always been a treat. So it's a real special treat to come back and be able to serve the community and the children of the Arlington School District at this time in my career. 28 plus years in facilities operations. I began with custodial services with Norfolk Public Schools District and worked through the ranks coming up and learning the nuances from there. So I think the big thing that I want to report to this panel is that we have a team that I think is capable of doing outstanding things. Some of those individuals you'll hear from tonight are working very hard behind the scenes and are very capable in doing what's needed for not only the students that we prize within the Arlington district, but I think also doing the right things for the citizens of Arlington as well. So I'm excited to be a part of the group. It's been welcome, open arms for me and my family. And again, thank you for the opportunity to join you here tonight.
Well, thanks so much. We're delighted to have you. We're really happy to have you here in Arlington. As you know, we're always busy building a school or doing additions. So I don't think you're going to be bored.
No doubt about it. I can already see that for sure.
And thank you for talking about your team. I do want to say that each of our commissions is actually supported by a terrific group of people on the both the APS side and the county side. We certainly couldn't do this or run meetings without them. And so I do want to acknowledge both the APS staff and the county staff we have here tonight. I know that a few of you are making sure that our meeting runs smoothly, because I know it does take a lot of behind the scenes work, but also many of you are here just to, ask questions and lend us your expertise. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so what we're going to do is John and Stacy and I and Colleen have put together an actual agenda. And actually, Robert, you have a lot of it on a slide, right? There we go. Okay, yes. Terrific. Thank you. So this is the agenda for tonight. We're going to look at, we've done our greetings. We're going to look at clarifying questions or take clarifying questions on the APS Capital Improvement Plan. We're going to have a general conversation between the FAC and the JFAC about the elements in the APS Capital Improvement Plan. We are going to then take public comment. And then we will do a wrap up, kind of listening to what people have to say, and we will start to formulate some recommendations. I do want to mention that the reason we are having this joint meeting, well, we generally try to do this joint meeting. We've been doing it for a couple of years because we think it's really it's really powerful, I think, to provide input to both APS and the county from two bodies that think about facilities all the time. And so, we like to see where we align, where we may not align. And there may be, very good reasons for that. But where we align, I think our our recommendations really carry a lot of weight with the boards, and so that's why we thought it would be a good idea to continue meeting jointly. I will note that on I think it's the 25th, the school board is going to have a work session on the CIP. And they, I believe, have invited John and I to be there and provide some of a summary of what we discussed tonight and our thoughts on the CIP. So that's why we have the timing right now, why we're meeting this week. John, I know you had asked for information from the county on their CIP, and actually the initial CIP presentation was done last night at the county board meeting. And I thought that before we launch into the clarifying questions on the APS capital improvement plan, I could just very briefly go through what the county is thinking for the CIP that they introduced last night. I should note there was really no guidance that was provided by the county board members. Last night was really for Mr. Schwartz, our county manager, to provide what his thinking on the CIP. So I'm going to try to share my screen. This is what I've had problems with earlier today. And that's not it. But this is it. So are you seeing a PowerPoint that says county manager's proposed fiscal year 2022-2024 budget or plan?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Okay. I'm going to go very quickly through this. I don't necessarily have all the answers on this, but this was the capital plan that was presented last night at the board meeting, quite late, for the fiscal year 2022 to 2024. So again, a very truncated CIP, not what we're used to. We're used to a 10-year CIP, but following on from last year's 1-year CIP, the future is still a little uncertain about how we come out of the pandemic, and therefore the county and schools have decided to be very conservative in terms of their planning and the capital improvement plan. So these are the guiding principles that they indicated: a constrained approach. They're looking at this as another bridge year to get us to what will be our new normal in terms of the budget and the economic recovery. The county is prioritizing projects that address failing or end-of-life infrastructure. So they've listed here some bridges, trails, and roads, technology system, roofs, and HVAC systems, which I think will be familiar to those of you on the APS side as well, since you have some HVAC improvements you're planning to make as well. They obviously, in any CIP in any budget, they have to meet legal and regulatory obligations. So Metro, we are obligated to pay for that, and to restart investments identified as part of existing planning processes in the county. So neighborhood conservation had been largely scaled back in recent years, and Crystal City planning as well. And technology and facilities investments with consideration of the new workplace environment post-pandemic. So what that means is the county would like to understand, with everybody having teleworked for the last 18 months, the county would like to understand what the commercial real estate and specifically office space market looks like in Arlington. As you know, we enjoy an almost 50-50 split between commercial and residential taxes as part of our tax base. And commercial, obviously fuels a lot of what we have in Arlington. And so there is, some concern about how quickly office space comes back, and if it looks different when it comes back. This is how we pay for the CIP. And again, all of this is on the website, and you can also listen to the county board meeting at the very end last night, because the county manager and his staff did do a presentation on this. But this shows how we're paying for the CIP. And then these are the items in the bond referenda that they're recommending. So you'll have the general heading the amount, the total amount for that item, and then underneath, what are the elements of that element of the bond. So for community infrastructure, they're looking at neighborhood conservation, facilities maintenance, the courthouse complex renovations that were that had been kind of kicked off last year, courts and police building improvements, and Quincy's site design. And so that total 17 million. Local parks and recreation, you've got the Arlington Boathouse, Bluemont Park Tennis Court, and trail and bridge modernization. Metro and transportation, again, a lot of this is mandatory. In terms of, certainly Metro, we have an obligation to fund it. And paving, and then bridge maintenance and replacement. And the total of these items is 62.535 million. So I would note, when I went back and looked at what the projection had been for this year in terms of the CIP, it was more in the neighborhood of 115 million. So you can see that the county has definitely scaled back what it is that they're going to put in this year's CIP, and certainly what they're going to go out for bond for. And then there are just the supporting documentation, really, or additional information is on the following slides here. I'm not going to go into the slides in any sort of detail. I do want to go to the end, though, and they are showing, they talk about, of course, our debt service, and that we need to keep it under 10%. And this is how they get feedback on the CIP. And then this, it's the schedule that I'm interested in showing you. Oh, they also included Arlington Public Schools, what had been proposed by APS as well. So that is in here, and that was in here for information for the county board, so that they understood what APS was thinking about. And then this is where I was hoping to get. So this is the timeline for the CIP, for the approval of the CIP. So the county manager and staff presented this yesterday. May through July, there will be these work sessions. And June 29th, there is a public hearing. July, week of the 12th, there will be a final board markup. And then July 17th is their board adoption. So you will see there is a significant gap, a difference between APS kind of working through their part of the CIP and the county working through their part of the CIP. But I will say the county, also wants to be informed by APS's CIP, which is why they are doing, they're a few weeks behind in terms of where they are in the process. It's by design, I believe, and again, so that they can incorporate what APS is doing and what APS is asking for. And that's it. And I'm going to unshare here. Okay. And I don't know that it's useful to take any questions, because I'm not the person who is presenting that. So I don't know if there are general comments that people have. If so, if you want to raise your hand or just turn on your camera to be recognized. I'd be interested to hear what kind of comments might be. Matt.
Hello, everybody. I just want to say that, and thank you, Kathleen, for going through that. As you mentioned, the county CIP is less than 24 hours old at this point, and we've got a 2-month process ahead of us. So we're very early in on that, and we're working with the JFAC chairs on a time when JFAC can have a more detailed review of the county CIP.
Thank you for that. Yes. We did want to show it to you, though, since we knew that it was that the county manager was presenting it last night, only so that, in our thinking, we're always, the county and APS are always trying to balance, the needs for both sides, and try to figure out, whose projects are going to get into the CIP. And, as we provide advice to the boards, we want to make sure that we understand what those priorities are and what they're juggling. Steve, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. I guess I just want to articulate a bit of an initial sense of disappointment in the Parks and Recreation component of the proposed CIP. And this is a theme I might return to with APS as well. But we saw an incredible increase in use of the parks with COVID. And my impression is that even as things begin to loosen up, um, thousands of people really discovered their local parks and for the first time and kind of realized, wow, this is something right next door. I don't have to drive to Great Falls and fight to get a parking space. You know, I may even be able to walk to my park and actually have trails. So I'm very disappointed at what appears to be a very low proposed investment. And the disproportionate, nothing against the tennis courts, but that seems kind of out of whack to me to be proposing $5 million for the Bluemont tennis and 1 million for trail work. So for a county that has committed to a biophilic city approach, I I guess I just want to put a marker down as kind of a sense of disappointment. And I realize we're going to have opportunities for input. I also would like to see more work going forward and very promising, increased collaboration between the county and APS. But looking at the lands that APS owns that have ecological values, environmental values, in many cases contiguous with parks. And I would hope that we'll see more work between the two entities to look at developing wildlife corridors, really providing even more environmental amenities, not only for the biodiversity of the county, but also for ourselves as humans. We were sure out there last year, and we're sure still out there right now because I'm seeing it every day. So thanks, and I will stop with that.
Thank you, Steve. Claire?
Yeah, I had a high-level overview of just the level of detail between the county CIP, which clocks in at 281 pages, and at least the superintendent's presentation of APS's CIP, which is a PowerPoint, large font, and 32 pages. I'm not simply just talking numerical pages. I'm really not clear at how the APS determined the level of detail that would be appropriate for the CIP. For example, in looking back at some of the agenda items that were on APS's FAC past meetings, there were other projects discussed, right, that are capital projects. And I didn't see anywhere in this CIP context decisions of why not to pursue those projects during this particular proposal. There's just not as much detail, putting aside narratives, just trying to understand context. I'm wondering if anyone can talk about, it doesn't have to be right now, but sometime this evening, talk about what is the right level of detail to present and why are there such disparate levels of detail between the two CIPs.
All right. Let's get through any questions we have. Actually, maybe Claire's was the last question. I'm looking. Anybody else have any other questions? Okay. Not seeing that. I did want to mention one thing that I neglected to mention at the beginning of this, and that is that Leslie Peterson is actually going to join our call. She is in another meeting right now. And so any questions that deal with, exactly how the numbers in the CIP for APS, how they impact, or how they how they arrived at them. I think she could probably give a high level overview of that. So any questions about the actual CIP projects numbers, her spreadsheet, her famous spreadsheet. She will be on later to answer any questions about that. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. And Robert had sent me a quick little primer on who can answer what question. And so any facilities questions would be answered by Mr. Gregory. We're throwing him right out there, I guess. Any projections and miscellaneous questions can be answered by Lisa Stengel. And then budget questions again would be answered by Leslie Peterson. So I think, Claire, your question about the level of detail is interesting. And I didn't know if anybody, maybe Mr. Gregory or Lisa, wants to take that one.
I can answer that one. Hi, everybody. I would actually say in a typical year, in a typical CIP process, we do our AFSAP, which is, I think it was a 100-page document last time we did it, plus 600 pages of supporting details about various CIP projects that we've done in the past or studies. Because we've had back-to-back now, or we've had 2 back-to-backs and another back-to-back CIP last year, we don't have the staff to do an ASAP plus multiple CIPs, plus all of the other things we've had to do with the change this year that has been really unusual for us. So typically we would have that. I would welcome in the future if there was something that we should change about that ASAP to help. I do think you guys talked with Michael Frickel earlier this year, and later you're going to, not at this meeting, but I think at your next meeting, you'll be able to preview some of those site studies. We want to sort of take those documents that return every year and put them in a resource page where everybody can see them and really focus the AFSAP on the analysis and the needs.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for reminding us that the AFSAP is much more detailed. Okay, any other questions or comments on what you've heard? Claire, did you still have your hand up? Did you have another question?
Sorry, I'll bring it down.
Okay, great. All right, so now what I'd like to do is I'd like to move on to the next part of the agenda. We're a few minutes behind, but I wanted to hear any clarifying questions that people have in the APS CIP. So you all had received information. You've received a copy of the CIP. You were able to view the video that was when the CIP was presented. In that video, Leslie Peterson did a really thorough job of explaining her spreadsheet and how one should read it. Doesn't mean, of course, you may not have any questions about it, but those will have to wait till she gets here. And so what I'd like to do is kind of a round robin and find out if anybody saw something in the CIP that raised specific questions for them. And again, I'm just going to ask people to either raise their hands or put themselves on camera, and I can see that, and then we can call on you. And actually, John, maybe you can help me make sure that we're getting everybody.
Sure. Thank you, Annette. Thanks for pulling up this one page. I think that's I was hoping to get something like this. So this is a good summary of what's covered in the APS CIP. And I'll just add a couple of things because FAC spent a lot of time talking about air quality for obvious reasons this past year. So I think the community may have questions about how that's reflected or not in the APS CIP. So, and staff can add on to this, but a couple things. One is APS is focused on air filtration devices in classrooms to help filter the air, I think of all classrooms. You will see some major infrastructure spending in the CIP that is for HVAC upgrade and maintenance. However, that is consistent with the life cycle timelines of HVAC systems. So I just want to be clear because there'll be a lot of, I think, questions and wondering about this. There's been no change to that from prior years. HVACs will be maintained, upgraded, and replaced as we've been planning to do according to the life cycles. So you will see funding in the CIP, but it's pretty consistent with what had been in there prior. So I just wanted people to understand that.
So John,
Yeah.
so the line here about air quality and HVAC improvements, I know it's one I also asked Kathy about when we spoke with her. But so in terms of air quality, none of the items in this CIP are necessarily going to impact the air quality of classrooms in time, certainly in time for going back to school in September.
So there's the air filtration devices in classrooms that have been purchased already. And those will be there and they'll remain there for classrooms. But that's separate from CIP. There is no, I'd say, acceleration in HVAC air quality planning per this CIP. And I don't say that with any judgment. I just want people to understand that so that they can, it's a little confusing, I think, because of all the issues with the pandemic. We are continuing along a path that had been planned prior. There's no acceleration in that.
Okay. All right, great. It's not necessarily pandemic related, is what you're saying.
Correct. It's along the lines of what we've been planning prior to that. And I know people have tend to have views one way or another on that, but that should be clear.
Going back up to the top, maybe we could talk about the upgrades to kitchens and ask if anybody has any questions about that. I know I did, certainly, when I saw that. Are there any members of either the FAC or the JFAC? So I'll just, perhaps you already know this, but I did ask about 25 million, I think it was, in the CIP to do facility upgrades to kitchens, and I was wondering if that couldn't be put off for another CIP for another time. What I learned was that facility, the upgrades to kitchens, and after it was explained, it made more sense to me. Not only do they need more space for cold storage and prep and that sort of thing, but the issue that we've had over the last several years with the high student population and the fact that some schools are actually having to start lunches extremely early, 10 or 10:30 in the morning, because they went from having, in elementary school, maybe they went from having 2 lunches to having 3, and to be able to, get all the kids through in a reasonable time frame and make sure that people actually eat. They want to, there's a desire to improve the kitchen so that there's more efficiency and maybe even more lanes that would allow children to get their food a little faster, and therefore maybe bring the number of lunches down, back down to 2 maybe in some of the schools. So I just thought I would share that with everybody since I had that question. Claire?
Yeah, this is kind of a shout out in support of increasing serving lines from 1 to 2. I can personally attest that for a lot of elementary school students, the desire to stand in a long line in order to get your lunch is very low, which impacts the number of students who are willing to purchase lunch. And you have to it's really important for schools to get the right combination of purchasing lunch. You don't want that to drop so low, and I think there's like subsidization issues. And so I really do appreciate that this is not just a convenience factor. It really does impact function to expand to 2 serving lines. So I can appreciate what these changes are trying to do.
Right. And Stacy.
Thank you. I just wanted to, say that I support the facility upgrades to the kitchens. I do think it goes a long way to the functionality of a school and, our common spaces, which are something we don't often think about as our schools grow. But in in doing these upgrades, I would hope that, you know, if we have a list of upgrades to do, that if there is a school in a part of the county that is experiencing high growth, like, for example, a Randolph, that we have looked at in the past for additions. I think it was just last year we looked at Randolph as a possible school for an addition on Western Columbia Pike, which is experiencing, you know, part of the county which is still experiencing some elementary school growth. That, you know, some of the upgrades to the kitchens require about 1,000 square foot addition. And if we're going to put that, I just want to be mindful that we're, you know, making a long-term investment in these schools, and that if we are, you know, if that school is going to, you know, in 5 years' time, actually get a full addition, then maybe sort of maybe not prioritize that school to do it this year, because we don't really have a great, you know, we're still kind of going on COVID projections, and we still, you know, I just would like to be mindful of the long range, you know, kind of the long-term implications of these facility upgrades, especially the ones that would require 1,000-foot addition.
Thank you, Stacy. Steve?
Hi, thank you. Just a couple of comments, I guess. First on the kitchens, I actually really support these for a different reason, and that is, if you look at the schools that are proposed, not all, but many are highly corollary with schools that have high population levels of free and reduced lunch, meaning that these students are the ones that rely on meals provided by the schools for their daily nutrition. And as mentioned earlier, when there's long lines, that just creates another barrier to get through. Whereas some of the more affluent parts of the county, you at least have the option of bringing your lunch to school. In terms of the fields, I guess more of a general comment is I would like at some point in time for Williamsburg lighting to be readdressed. There was a substantial investment that was made in those fields up there, and they're not being used to their full capacity based on a decision, I believe it was about 3 years ago, to table and then readdress in the future the lighting at that location. That would afford greater field opportunities for the county that has grown substantially in the last few years. And then my last comment is related to the parking garage at the Heights. About $15 million, I believe, or $13 million investment is what's being proposed. Of that, roughly $9 million, $9.5 million is associated with the parking garage for 75 parking spaces. I think that this should be pushed in the CIP for a few more years until we can get a better handle on what the additional capital investments will be needed across the county. That's a substantial amount of money for very few parking spots, especially when there's such prolific amounts of parking available in that part of the county right now.
Thank you.
I think staff can talk a little about the Heights, please, because that's another somewhat confusing aspect. So please, someone from APS.
Michael has his hand up, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, it's not the Heights to disappoint you, John. I just wanted to mention that to Steve's point from his one of three questions was regards to the kitchens and the upgrades. And as mentioned before, that and I put it in the chat so that just everyone understands the Title I K-3 initiative schools. So 5 of the 8 kitchen upgrades, which also was harps to what Claire was mentioning. Getting students through breakfast, especially at the schools where many of our students receive breakfast. it is a challenge, not only at that time because of the fact that you might have, almost half the population of the students showing up in order to receive breakfast prior to school. Having two lines would be the more equitable approach in order to make sure that everyone gets fed prior to school in order to have adequate learning take place. So in the chat, I went ahead and put down those 5 of the 8 schools that are part of the Title I K-3 initiative. And if people aren't familiar with that, that's sort of a federal funding that we receive based on the free and reduced lunch rates at our schools. And that puts a cap on the number of actual students that we instruct in the classroom. So that's what I can add to that conversation. As to the other 2 that Steve said, I would have to go ahead and lean more on my fellow APS staff.
Thank you, Michael. It's a very
Sure.
important point.
Thank you, Michael. That was an outstanding point there. Regarding the heights, Kathleen, I'd like to ask Jeffrey Chambers to be able to expound on that and to give us the information, if he'd be so kind to do so at this time on that.
Good evening. I think it's a lot of issue with regard to it. The issue has been reduced to parking. It's been that way from the use permit conversation on. The building was actually designed that the ground level was a main entrance to the building. And we ended up putting the Schreiber program goes into the ground level, and on the first floor level is the HB Woodlawn administrative area. And one of the problems with the old Stratford program and their entry to the building was the pickups and drop-offs of disabled students by parents throughout the school day, as well as drop-off and pickup at multiple times at pickup at arrival and dismissal. The main portion of the or the main purpose of the structure that is under or that is in the rear of the building that is already constructed was to provide that covered pickup and drop off for the students. It was to provide handicapped parking so that students could be picked up and dropped off. And also at the same time, it was parking was provided, secure parking was provided in that structure for staff. And one thing that we get a lot of requests for as we go through the county process is to provide covered bike storage or bike racks for students. And that was also in that original design and what was part of that structure. But to get into a covered structure, pick up and drop off, you do need the handicapped accessible spaces, and you do need to basically have a loop to get around and get back out. We did look at the option C that we've looked at as part of the CIP study, builds about half of the space under the field. And that space, the difference in cost from building just that versus adding the additional parking spaces is only a couple $1 million. So we felt that, and the recommendation was for the option A is in the CIP at this point in time, because that difference is so slight to provide the needs that are needed. We also looked at an option that the board came up with of a temporary solution that they wouldn't have to do a whole lot. But with that, we looked at putting in some temporary parking on the surface, and we looked at the field would stay basically what it is currently, which is that grass turf field with sloped edges. So we looked at that. We do not have our final certificate of occupancy for the building because there's stormwater structures that have to be done as part of this phase 2 as well. Because they were not able to be built because of tiebacks from the Penzance project, as well as the fire station being in place. So when you look at the temporary solutions, they have to have that stormwater work done as part of that. We did have another option that we looked at early on, which was basically to just build the field and have the covered walkway. The other thing is the covered walkway from the buses. Buses drop the students off on 18th Street, and then we had a slight ramp that ramps from 18th Street to that Schreiber entrance, again, making it that main entrance. One of the biggest features of the building was to provide a synthetic turf field on top of that structure. And all of the options that we were looking at, A, B, and C, provided that maximum size field. I mean, it's not a full size field, it never was, but it's lighted. And the intent is that that field also gets used by Parks and Rec on non-school hours. With the temporary options, we would not have a field of that size because we would be using some of that area to create a covered walkway. In the option D2, we would be providing parking on part of that area. But essentially, it's just a sloped field. If we went to the option B that we had looked at earlier, again, we have to build foundation walls. We have to put in controlled fill to put that turf field on, and part of it would be on structure if we would have the walkway, bike parking, staff bike parking, and those spaces in there. It would not have the handicap parking, it would not have the covered drop-off. Since the building has been opened, there's been some serious challenges with regard to accessibility to that building. We have, I think it's 3 or 4 accessible parking spaces on Quinn Street. We are actually this summer planning on modifying those so that they are true curbside handicap spaces that the disabled person can get out of either the passenger side or the driver's side and still be in a protected parking space. So we are doing that, but it's been a severe challenge. We've had a lot of comment from our Schreiber community with regard to that accessibility and the switchback ramp that currently gets them into that lower level. And they are out in the weather when they're doing that. So it's really an issue of the accessibility. That's the main issue. And the parking is an ancillary feature of that. It's not about the parking, it's about the accessibility. And I think as we go forward, we need to make sure that that's part of the conversation so everybody understands that. Because we did put that population in that building and they were expecting certain things when they moved in there, and they haven't received those, even though the building's been open for a few years. So that's the conversation I think that we have to have is with that group and how that works with the building. So I hope that helps answer some of those questions. It's a very complicated problem, and it's been something that we've been working through as we've occupied the building. It's not as prevalent right now because of COVID, and we don't have as many students there. But the Schreiber program is actually occupying the building and utilizing the spaces and getting that access. And again, we tried to improve from where we were at Stratford to this new facility, and we really have not. We've actually made that accessibility worse.
Okay, thank you very much for explaining that.
Sure.
Steve, is your hand still up, or did you have another comment or question?
No, I'll save my comments for later. Sorry, forgot to lower it.
Mr. Gregory.
I wanted to comment on just to drop back just for a second and comment on the kitchens and the comments that were made regarding the kitchens. During my early, just brief tenure, I've had an opportunity to take a look at this aspect, and I just wanted to assure everyone in attendance tonight that I'm in full agreement that we need to give some special attention to the kitchen upgrades that need to be made throughout the district. It's very obvious to me. I've voiced my opinion on that, and I have seen the clear need to move forward in that area and to be able to expound on expanding those areas and doing the best we can in those areas. So I just wanted to make that clear before we moved on, that that's something I've seen myself, and I'm fully supporting it.
Can you add your thoughts on the security vestibules also?
Right now, John, that is something that I have not looked into during the time that I've been there, but that is next on, it is on my list. But the kitchens, John, was something that I did take a special opportunity to check out at the facilities in particular. And hopefully very soon I'll be getting a handle on the security vestibules as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like Claire also has her hand up.
Yeah, that was not just a holdover. So about the security vestibules, so it was very helpful to see each of the kitchen upgrades, diagrammed out. I did notice that the security vestibules were not diagrammed out. I also believe that they may not actually already be like a fully baked plan for each school. I'm assuming that's why they're not all diagrammed out here, and it's not just some sort of top secret thing. What is the process if we've got a CIP and we're saying here's where the security vestibules are going to be, but there's disagreement maybe with the principal, or it's not clear that you can even fit it in with stairwells and where the existing entrances are. What happens after that?
I think that's a question for staff.
I'd like to touch base on that before I extend it to Jeff or even Ben on our staff to talk about that. One of the last projects that we worked on before leaving Seattle, Washington, I'm going to give you a little bit of view, was a vestibule. And John, that was something there that again was a major project out west. And to go to your question there, many times we did find a disagreement between the principal and facilities on the formation, where it should be placed, what sector, what type of devices should be used, the type of actual security device when formulating that. But the main thing that we had to look at with the situation that we were dealing with was the actual layout of the building had a lot to do with it. We had individuals that had some experience with some actual problems in the community with some actually security issues from the past that it caused us to have to make sure that we had involved the community more than normal to be able to come to an accurate understanding of how they should be placed and where they should be placed. And it's not an easy decision. Many different views, but when we laid it out and found out exactly what the needs were, from a scope of individual facilities, not just taking a scope of just saying X marks the spot, taking each individual's facility for its own layout and working with the community on that, we were able to smooth that piece out. When we tried to go with just a complete sweeping idea of where each one should be located in every elementary school, we failed. So we had to take an individual approach, and we had to really work with the exact locations by including the community and their thoughts. And then we started getting some momentum on that. So I wanted to share that. Jeffrey or Ben, did you want to add anything to the vestibule piece?
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. We actually are currently doing 3 security vestibules this summer as part of the kitchen work that we're doing as part of the refreshes. All of the security entrances were vetted. We had some entry vestibules that were more complicated that are actually scheduled that were in the last CIP that actually funding is available and we would intend to begin working on. And those are more complicated where we actually are going to be relocating offices so that they are providing the security that we are doing at all of our new buildings, as well as when we retrofit. Every building is looked at independently and individually. And we are looking at that. Essentially, we're working with our safety and security group, and they have reviewed every one of the options or projects locations that we have in this year's CIP. Most of these are more straightforward and simple. Basically, we are creating a secure vestibule where you have to enter the office and register. You can't just go in through doors and end up in the hallway and disappear down the hallway and not be registered in the office. So our security, the way APS works, is we are working that you come into the office space. Some locations, and in fact, with the Swanson project that we're looking at, it is a very difficult building to get into because of if you come in the main entry door or where the visitor would come in, there's a stairwell that blocks you from getting into the office, and then there's the health suite. And actually on this one, we've come up with, I think, what's a relatively simple solution. However, it does require to completely renovate the office space so that essentially visitors will come around to the front of the building. And actually, there was a lot of comments made by the community because of the historic nature of the Swanson building. And essentially, we would be reusing the old front door will become the entry to come into the building to solve that security entrance issue and make it like all of the other schools. We're trying to provide equity to all of the buildings. And the group that we have in this year's CIP would be the remaining schools that do not have security vestibules. So that's essentially what we're doing. But we did look at each individual school. We do have sketches that we put together for that. And they were all estimated by estimators, and the costs that are put in are realistic with regard to the work that we're looking at doing.
So in terms of Claire's question, then there are sketches, or there are plans. Well, sketches and plans are two different things. So what would you say they are?
They're developed sketches. They are plans that show where it would go. It developed, what we have to replace, whether it's doorways, hardware, all of that was identified as part of the design so that the estimators had the information required. Now, when we do a CIP, we make sure that we have all of the costs covered based on the design. And then when we actually do the work, we will actually work with the administration in the office and do the actual detailed drawings with a design professional, working with our safety and security group, and we will make sure that everything is applicable or works with the school, and everybody is aware of what we're doing and how it works. Because there are changes that will have to happen in the offices where, depending where the entry becomes or where you come into the entry. Some are very easy by when we did Drew a few years ago, we actually enlarged the vestibule and we're able to come right into the existing office. In some places we have to move offices, and in some places we have to build a new vestibule outside of the office, which would become the visitor's entry. So there's multiple ways that we do that, but we did try to keep it simple and we tried to keep it as less disruptive as possible. But even in the refreshes that we're doing this year, the main administrative area gets renovated as part of the work that we're doing. At the ATS building, for instance, we have to take out a toilet facility to come in from the vestibule and enlarge the vestibule to get to the office.
So Jeff, the three that you're doing then this summer are not three that are on this list. These are ones that need to be funded by the CIP. Okay, thank you. Michael De Palma, you have your hand up again.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. One last thing I just wanted to add to this discussion when we talk about security and vestibules. We do not, as APS, post any of our facility layouts online because of the fact that is a security risk. And I understand that the kitchen upgrades were shown, and however that decision was made is what it is. However, we need to keep that in mind, that if anyone that in the public would like to come and see facility layouts, they have to come down to the trade center itself in order to see them. So I mean, I understand Claire's concern as to, why details and all that are not provided. But I mean, in itself, security vestibule has security in it. So we need to sort of keep that in mind when we're considering sharing this type of information out to the public.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. I'm sure that I think it's a fair question just to ask, are there plans? Because of course they weren't posted. It's understandable why they're not posted, but
yeah, for sure, I totally understand that, and I'm just trying to give some clarity to maybe why.
Thank you. So so we haven't heard a lot from anybody on. Well, we've had one comment on fields, and that is Williamsburg, having lights. Wakefield and Greenbrier are two more on this list. Nobody's touched on the Career Center, which is actually a little surprising to me. So does anybody have any comments on maybe some of the things we haven't heard about? Wells.
Good evening, everybody. Just a few quick questions on the Career Center. So as I understand it, assuming that it's approved, the objective would be to bring the Career Center online by 2026 and provide several hundred new secondary seats. Looking at the bond authority, I understand that the cost estimates haven't come in yet for either the 1,300 or the 1,800 seat variant. I mean, do we have a sense as to whether we could be at risk of maxing out our bond authority in order to make the Career Center project move forward in the way that we might prefer, or is that not a concern?
I would actually wait until Leslie arrives for that question.
I was going to say, might be more of a Leslie question.
Okay, great.
Oh,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry, just one quick follow-up. So I know that one of the objectives of it would be to kind of, bring some relief to middle schools, which are currently, system-wide projected to be over capacity by a few hundred seats, at least for the next few years. Are there any, capital options on the table for addressing capacity issues for middle school? Or is the plan to rely on, a mix of boundary adjustments and relocatables?
So we've got the proposal in there for the Career Center, which does, prior to this year, it was only high school, so that would be part of it. There will be boundary adjustments that are happening this fall. There's also some other tools that we can use. We could always, there is capacity in one part of the county that there's excess capacity, and it's something we can consider. I don't think I would do that again without sort of everybody behind us and going in that same direction, because changing the use of an existing school would be very controversial. And we've lived through that once, and I'd really want to see FAC behind that and see the school board behind that before we went out and did that in an elementary boundary process. But we do have excess capacity in one corner of in the northwest corner of the county, and could consider that. And relocatables will always be part of our planning.
So I noticed Leslie Peterson is about to join us. Hello, Leslie. Welcome to the meeting. We're going to let you catch your breath, though, before we lob you the question that was just raised that is appropriate for you. So let me go to Steve Young. And actually, Wells, were you finished? Be ready to come back to talk to Leslie in a minute.
Sounds good. I guess just one quick follow-up, and that is that are there any options on the table for addressing capacity issues, besides repurposing existing sites? I was thinking, for example, a potential expansion of a current site, like was recently done for the McKinley site. Is there anything like that that might be considered? I know that the timeline might be pretty fast at this point. And so the seats might not come online by the time that they're really needed, and there may not be enough distance between that and the Career Center opening up. But I just wanted to see if that was considered.
Michael DePalma, do you have your hand up to actually address that question?
I do, but it's very direct, though. I'm sorry that it might not be as broad as some other questions. However, this has come to light recently. At this point in the year, we usually reach out to all of our building managers to sort of schedule our MCMN and what we have available for minor construction, major maintenance. I think I have that right. A part of that is we asked if there's any sort of internal modifications that might be easily available. And two that come to mind, well, one that I'll speak about now that comes to mind is at Kenmore. Kenmore has a couple internal spaces that are not easily used in a classroom setting. They're both in the library area of that building. And what the principal and the building manager have proposed is that we go ahead and do some internal modifications in order to make those actual classrooms that are more functional, and they're separate, and they have their own entranceway, they have their own sort of space identified. So to go back to Wells, sort of asking, are there any other options that we have out there besides just, boundary changes and besides adding relocatables to classrooms? We do look at our facilities to see if there's any other room, and to sort of, go back to a quote that John Chadwick always used to say, we're pretty much spent when it comes to making any sort of internal modifications at our facilities. However, we do get fortunate every once in a while when we have some creative outlooks that take place on the administrative level. And I think Kenmore is one. There are some spaces there that we might be able to gain a couple classrooms. And that would definitely, alleviate, their sort of their restrictions when it comes to the over-enrollment.
Thank you for that. And we also have, places like W&L and Wakefield where spaces that were formerly not really used were repurposed for, to create additional space. I wanted to jump to Steve Young, and then I'm going to come back to Wells so he can pose his question to Leslie. Steve, you're on mute. We can't hear you. Okay, while you fix your technical difficulties, then I'm just going to jump to Wells. And Wells, go ahead and ask your question of Leslie, if you could.
Hi, Leslie. So my question was about whether the bond authority that we have left might constrain our options for the Career Center. So I know that the cost estimates haven't come in yet as to what the project, and its different variants might be likely to cost. But should we expect any limitation on the project based on how much bond authority we have left?
That's not a loaded question. I guess it would depend on what the starting point is for the cost for the Career Center, right? If it's $185 million, which is what it was in the 2019 to 27 CIP, then yes, that will absolutely put a constraint on the other things that can be put into the CIP, especially with the time frame that the school board is looking at. They want to have the new Career Center building available in the fall of 2025. That means, a lot of construction dollars needed in the next several years. And with all of the building that we've done, yes, we will have constraints on how much we can issue over the next 6 years. It'll just depend on what that final number is, and also obviously what the breadth of the other projects are. We've put forth kitchen renovations, entrance renovations, the HVAC renovations and upgrades needed in the buildings, and the other project that was put forward was the Heights building, that phase 2 portion. So it will definitely have a bearing on what else can be put into the budget, into the CIP. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I certainly appreciate that. I guess I probably should have done a better job asking my question, and that is taking these, for example, $180 million or so price tag, if that's what it ends up coming in as. I mean, do we have the authority for that? Will we have the ability to build at that price and get funding for it through the bond market, or would that actually, crowd out literally everything else?
We are looking at scenarios as requested by the school board for what it would look like if we did the Career Center. And we've used the $185 million as an estimate. We don't have a lot of other ability to issue bonds if we do the Career Center in the next 6 years. I'm not going to give any specifics because I don't know if the board has actually seen those scenarios yet, and I don't want to get ahead of them. But I mean, just, you know, if you just look at what was presented under the superintendent's proposed and how much bonding authority was available over and above the projects that were in the CIP, I think that was about $148 million. I don't have that pulled up right now, but I think it was about $148 million in additional bonding capacity that was available over and above the projects that were included in the CIP. And if the Career Center is going to be $185 million, 185, 148, there's not enough capacity. So something has to give.
So let me add a little context from a fact perspective, but I'll start with a question. So for the CIP, when we talk about the Career Center, is the board looking to approve the project or to approve some certain funding to begin planning the project? So I'm not clear on that.
I will start to answer, but I'd love my facilities colleagues to jump in. We do have some funds available right now for design that were in last year's CIP that said design for, you know, 10-year projected seat needs. We could take all of those funds. There is $5 million left from the Arlington Tech project that we could use. But in order to start the construction and get the building done by the fall of 2025, we would need to have, I think, some additional design monies available. I'm not positive on this. And then the FY22 bond referendum would need to approve the construction of that. Let me just look real quick. Yeah, so we'd need the bond referendum would need to be in 2022. Couldn't be any later than that. There is funding available if we use the design funds that were available previously for design.
Okay, because from FAC's perspective, it's a big difference between basically approving some studies of what to do with the site versus kind of blessing the current project. So a little bit of different additional background. I think most of my FAC colleagues would say that the current proposal is interesting and intriguing, and probably a better proposal given the constraints of that site than the one from a year ago. So in some ways, it's very positive. But there are an awful lot of issues we've got since the world has changed so much. Bonding capacity, the projections go out 3 years, and they're much less certain than they maybe were just last year. There's the question of how much can virtual learning help at particularly the high school level. I think Lisa spoke of extra capacity in some parts of the county, at least in one particular area. We spoke of Kenmore possibly adding something. There are some other possibilities to add space. So I would say from my perspective, I think most of my FAC colleagues, it's unclear whether the county has an overall county issue with lack of seats. I do think, and I think most people would think, that there are areas of the county where there are pressures. Wakefield, for example, I think under most reasonable scenarios will have a shortfall. Gunston has a shortfall. But whether high school seats, when you look at county level, if you look at projections changing and maximizing the use of virtual in a positive way, perhaps we don't have the shortfalls from a county perspective. So given that, given the funding constraints, given the other priorities, I don't think a majority of my FAC members would say at this point that we would recommend going forward with the project. I would recommend further looking into what we can do with the site, possibly starting some parts of it that allows the site to be ready for something. But the current plan, I don't think we're ready in this economic environment to bless in this CIP. So I hope that helps provide a little bit of context.
And just to be clear, Leslie, I do have a question. I'll pose it as a question. We aren't in the superintendent CIP, he actually has no dollars in for the Career Center at the moment.
That's correct.
So it does appear, I mean, if you're looking at the CIP at this stage, APS has not asked for anything for the Career Center at this point.
That's also correct.
Okay.
But the school board did request to look at some scenarios that assumed a cost equal to the previous cost included in the CIP, which is why I said $185 million. And those scenarios will be presented, I believe, at the next, next CIP work session. So you'll be able to see what those look like at that time.
Thank you. I think we still have people with hands up, so I wanted to go to, let's go to somebody we haven't heard from. Cynthia.
Okay, hi, I don't know exactly to whom I'm going to address this to, but I went into this Career Center thing with a bunch of assumptions that have been talked about. Looking at that chart that was referenced, I thought this is not new money now, because I assumed that it was this pre-planning, pre-prepping, for lack of a better word, this site, very valuable APS real estate, so that with further discussion about what is the best mix of facility, there was a proposal out there, but as you ramp up your public, process on what should be there and what it should look like, maybe there are some changes there. So in other words, I wasn't looking at this current CIP as I think it was John that was saying, a blessing of soup to nuts. So if anybody wants to say that that is correct, in other words, if we did some of the things, because I and other people that I talked to about this project fully support the decision to get rid of the Fenwick building. It's sooner or later it would probably go, and getting rid of it and opening up the site to a more cost-effective ways to reuse it seems to be a very prudent thing to do. So this conversation is making me, I suppose my short question is, if we say to you we want to green light this, I mean, exactly what are we green lighting? Are we green lighting just restarting planning? Are we green lighting everything up to getting rid of the Fenwick building? Are we green lighting, as some have suggested, to the end of the project? Does anybody want to answer that? Because I think some of the stuff that has been proposed, the beginning to plan, get rid of Fenwick. I hope you do that.
So Cynthia, I think that we're back at the planning stage, right? We have some guidelines that were provided by the Career Center Working Group. in terms of, heights, density, massing. We certainly have the work of the BLPC and the PFRC up to this point. We certainly know what, can't be done for $185 million. I think that, there was an interesting proposal brought forward, but it's not a plan. It's a proposal, and it's creative. And it did involve getting rid of this Fenwick building, but it's not a full plan yet. And
I understand that, and that is not, I wasn't questioning that. I'm trying to find out what is it that we are being asked to decide for this 3-year CIP, because I hear everything from planning to the whole kit and caboodle. And so what are we asking about? Because some people are saying, well, if it's the whole kit and caboodle, then it's like these CIP proposals, both the county and the school board seem to be, what are you asking, that we pick and choose between these proposals? I mean, I guess no. I'll be the first one to say totally naive that I figure if the school board has come forward with a list of projects that they believe that this is the right suite of things to put in this 3-year thing, and we're not really being asked to, if you want this one, then you got to get rid of the other one.
So I think we're an advisory. We're advisory bodies to you advise the school board, and the JFAC actually advises both the school and the county board. And specifically in our charge is to advise them on the CIP. That's one of our charges.
Yes, I know that.
Charge. But, it's not really, I think any sort of advisory committee or commission is useful in that you're a second set of eyes on a set of proposals, and you ask useful questions. I mean, I think that's really what our role is. And if something doesn't seem quite right, or we think that there's, an element missing, it's incumbent on us to indicate that. And that's what we're doing here. And to the extent that we may not have a recommendation on this, because quite frankly, it isn't really baked, right? So I think the recommendation might be, do a little more planning, possibly. But I didn't really hear a question in there besides what it is that we're doing.
I'm sorry, there was a question. I'll try it actually 3 times. I'll try it again. So with regard to the Career Center and thinking about the input that is being desired, are we talking about, just a reprogramming of the 5 million because we're going to do planning, and I don't know, maybe you can demolish the Fenwick building for 5 million. I mean, what is it that is on the table for this CIP that you're trying to green light? That's my question. So when we say yes, go forward, what are we saying yes to? And I'm sorry if I missed that.
No. So if you look and maybe
so I'm sorry.
Maybe we should bring up the Leslie's chart again.
Well, maybe could I hear from the APS has proposed this, so could they answer that question?
Yes, but could we actually put up the chart? That might be helpful. Thank you. And Mr. Gregory, I see you've turned on your camera. So
yes, Kathleen, I'd like to and that's a very good question that's being asked, and I'd like to ask for Benjamin Bergen with our team to chime in and maybe shed some light on what he has to say there. I think it might clear things up. Ben?
Thank you, Marcus. And I think what I'll try to offer some comments to help frame the discussion for the group. What staff really want from the board's adopted CIP is the direction on what our work plan. What is it they're asking us to do to execute? Knowing that we're going to be in similar conversations next year to do this all over again. If there are elements of the the Career Center site proposal that these groups feel are beneficial, for staff to work on from now until the next time we revisit the CIP. I think that would be helpful feedback to have. John, I think to your question earlier about, what's being approved and what's kind of moving forward, the Career Center site project was in, 2 CIPs ago. And we trotted along in design phase, spent quite a bit of effort on that. We came with a proposal, and then ultimately that proposal was not accepted by the board, and they've removed the Career Center project from a subsequent CIP. So these things, Leslie mentioned that certainly before we begin construction, we have to have the bond referendum and authority to do that, though we sell the bonds, of course, across several years. There is a sort of 2 preliminary phases on these capital projects, and certainly something as complicated as the Career Center, there will be quite a bit of pre-construction planning and design work that needs to occur before we could even construct anything. So Cynthia, to your point directly, for example, if these groups feel like it's beneficial that Fenwick, that the community high school should be relocated, Fenwick should be demolished to open up opportunities at that site, whatever those opportunities may be, that could be something that staff work on in the next year.
Thank you. Those that I speak with fully support that.
I see Claire has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm just trying to follow up on something I actually heard from a county board member earlier this week talking in conjunction with the superintendent. And there was a statement made something along the lines of Arlington County has been conservative about its own CIP proposal in order to have plenty of bond capacity in the event our schools need it. And I'm trying to rethink what that meant. Is there an ability for the county to issue a bond to support a school building? Am I totally off base here, or hypothetically?
Leslie, why don't you?
I'll take that, Kathleen.
Yeah.
So the first thing you need to know is that schools don't issue bonds. Only the county can issue bonds. We don't have any bond issuing authority whatsoever. Okay. Anything we do has to be approved by the county. So when bonds are issued for the schools, they're actually county bonds issued on behalf of the schools, and then we pay them back.
Okay, that was confusing. Thank you.
But there's more to the answer. And that is that when we look at our debt capacity, we look at and the 10% is the limit for debt capacity. And the schools look at their projects and they try to stay within that 10% debt capacity. And the county does its projects and it stays within its 10% debt capacity. But there are times there have been times in the past when the schools have had projects on the books or on the table that required more than our 10% share of debt capacity. And we have gone to the county, and the county has actually said, yes, we will give you part of our debt capacity, because when the bond rating agencies look at the county, they look at the county as a whole, and they don't care how much is schools and how much is the county. They just want to know overall, all the projects between the county and the schools, do they stay within the 10% debt capacity? So there have been times when the schools have gone over its 10% debt capacity, and the county has stayed under the 10% capacity, so that schools could accomplish the projects that they needed to in order to provide the seats. So I think that maybe what you heard was that the county might have been anticipating that schools might need a little more debt capacity than they currently have. in order to do the Career Center or do the projects that they want to do. And so they restricted the number of projects that they put into their CIP.
That is probably exactly. Yes, thank you. That's very helpful clarification. Thank you.
And I would like to add one more thing while I have the floor, and that is, but we need to be very careful about doing that. Because adding projects and having a lot of projects in a short period of time, even if we have the debt capacity given to us from the county, we have to pay the debt service. And when we are issuing $70 or $80 million worth of bonds every year, that means the following year, we're looking at having to pay debt service, increasing debt service by $7 or $8 million. So if in the annual operating budget, so the last few years, debt service has been an increase of somewhere between $1 and $2 million, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. And we've also had reserves, debt service reserves that we've used to offset up to 50% of that increase. So we really haven't felt the impact of increasing debt service too much in the operating budget. But with revenues coming in lower and our budget getting tighter and tighter, when the county is providing us with, based on our revenue share, $20 million more per year, and we want to do a compensation increase, and we need to cover the cost of increasing enrollment, and we have to cover the cost of debt service. When you only have 20 million and a step increase is 11 and enrollment is 5 and then debt service is 7, all of a sudden you're over that $20 million revenue piece, and then you need to start cutting. So we need to weigh both sides of that equation. It's really great that the county is willing to provide us with additional debt capacity. It's what we do with that and how we spread that out that will make a difference. And for me, being the fiscally prudent person, going over our debt capacity also puts us in a position that if something were to happen in the next several years, like no one expected that we were going to have a pandemic, and our revenues, bottomed out. What happens if in 3 years something else happens and our revenues bottom out and we're over our debt capacity? We're going to be even more over our debt capacity with fewer revenues to actually pay for the debt service that we're already needing to pay. So just a few things to keep in mind when we look at putting more and more on the table.
Okay, I think we have time for one more comment before we go to public comment. Actually, before that, maybe I should, is there anybody here who is not one of our, yes, there are. Okay. Stacy, I think I see your hand up.
Thank you. Leslie, I just want to ask a clarifying question. I mean, to me, the Career Center project has always been complicated. And when I look at the proposal, I see not just a new standalone building, which I think is a good direction to go in, but I also see the total project cost needs to include the cost of building a new standalone building, cost of demolishing Fenwick, finding new seats for the Arlington Community High, and then renovating the Career Center to be an elementary school for Montessori, and then tearing down the Henry building and creating a field. So total project cost right now, you're looking at, if we say that total project cost is 184 million, so would the total project cost need to fit into that 184 million, which is already putting us over budget?
That's a really good question, and that's not really for me to decide. That's up to the school board to decide how much they want to spend on the Career Center project, and what they're willing to do or not do as a result of that. The brief that I was given was, take the 185 million that we had in the CIP previously, show us what it would look like if we did this project within that $185 million, and then show us what it would mean for the other projects that are currently in the CIP.
Okay.
At the end of the day, there is going to have to be a choice, unless the Career Center project doesn't cost $185 million.
Okay.
If it comes in something, you know, significantly less, and by that I mean $20 to $30 million less, then there might be plenty of room for everything. But if not, and if 185 million is the starting point, or the, you know, the placeholder that we use for that, then we won't be able to do everything.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for that clarification. I mean, I was mostly asking because I think there's a lot of moving parts here that we have to take into account. And I think from a JFAC point of view, because I sit on the FAC and I'm vice chair of JFAC, but I think from the JFAC point of view, I think it's really important that if APS is considering tearing down the Fenwick building, that we start looking for a place to relocate Arlington Community High as soon as possible, that we identify for a site, that we begin thinking about and understanding how tight the budget is for those seats, thinking very creatively. I think that, you know, I would suggest that if this group is going to make a recommendation, that is an important one to make, in terms of finding those seats and in a part of the county that makes sense for that school instructionally, and also that can come online quickly, because if we're tearing them down, you know, they're going to have to come up pretty fast. So that would probably mean in a office building somewhere, and, you know, that isn't adding to our bonding capacity that much. You know, I do think that in light of the, you know, that we really only have a vision of what our budget looks like 3 years out, you know, and there's still so much uncertainty about our projections, about the money, that, you know, whatever happens on this site, there is a lot of flexibility, you know, maybe and that expectations for that flexibility are very well managed, you know, that we aren't making a promise that this is going to be a 1,600 seat school, but maybe it ends up being a, you know, if projections fall, or if we can't afford it, maybe, you know, I'm not sure what happens, but a standalone building that provides common spaces for the, you know, and increases, you know, turns Arlington Tech into a middle school, high school program that's, you know, a couple hundred, you know, 400, 500 seats bigger, but increases the common spaces, because that's one thing at the Career Center that doesn't have right now. It doesn't have a gym that's comparable to our other schools, even HB. It doesn't have, you know, it doesn't have an auditorium, or, you know, a lot of the other common spaces that would be comparable to our tradition, you know, our other secondary seats, whether they're neighborhood or option. So I do think that support, and I do, you know, looking at the projections, you know, we're looking at a shortfall of 671 middle school seats the year before, and most of those seats are in Gunston and TJ. And so I just think that, you know, we really have to be mindful of middle school overcapacity. I know we can move some students around, but that's about what we were looking at when Swanson and Williamsburg had, you know, 22 classrooms and relocatables each, and that was far from ideal. So just, I mean, just sort of bringing up those points. And I do think that the planning is important to put in place, both short-term and long-term.
Thank you, Stacy. John, should we move on to the public comment?
Sure.
Okay. We have two members of the public here that I can see. It looks like we have Gregory Lloyd and Shirley Brothwell. I wanted to ask Gregory Lloyd, welcome. And did you have any comments or questions or recommendations on what we've discussed tonight?
No, I did not. I did identify myself in the chat. I'm actually the liaison from the superintendent's sustainability committee, and the members of FAC are used to seeing my face around, but I have no comments. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for being with us tonight. And Shirley, hello, Shirley. Did you have any comments on or recommendations on the that we should consider on the CIP?
Hi, Kathleen, and everybody who's from these two groups. I've just been here really trying to listen and learn. I'm interested in, learning more about what JFAC does. I'm obviously interested in the Career Center and any of these projects that could provide for or remove any athletic fields from our current inventory, which is overtaxed, but I don't have any comments on this, what you've been talking about tonight.
Thanks for being here. All right, so now we're in the wrap up and recommendations portion of our meeting. So I wonder if, Sarah, are you the one controlling the presentation? Would you mind putting up the slide that has all the different items in being recommended in the CIP? Thank you. John, I was just thinking that maybe we could just summarize what we think we've heard, and then people could
Sure.
People could comment and make sure that we heard right. So I was thinking there was a one-pager that listed them all.
Yeah. Well, you had it up earlier.
Yeah, I'll put it up.
Oh,
Just
it's. I'm sorry. I
no
called it
problem.
wrong.
Yep.
Okay, maybe we'll take these, back and forth here, John. I'm happy to start with the kitchens. So what I heard was that it sounds like most people on both committees believe that it's important for students to be able to run through cafeteria lines in the most efficient manner. It's not a convenience item. It actually is increasing serving lines. If we look at this through the lens of equity, which certainly the county has a resolution to do in all of their decisions, being that 5 of these 8 are Title I schools, and they have a high population of students receiving both breakfast and lunch here. And so, we as a group, support this. And I do think, to the extent that we do support things, it is helpful to board members to hear that.
The only thing I'll add here that can be a little bit confusing, because I've seen this on FAC, is kitchens but cafeterias are separate. So in some cases, we've had schools where cafeterias have been upgraded, but not the kitchens. And then at the same school, a year or two later, we come back to upgrade the kitchens, and people are saying, well, you just did that. No. So they're 2 different things. So I just want to point that out.
Thank you.
Okay.
Did you want to take the entry vestibules about what we heard?
I think we heard something similar, that there was general support for a recommendation to move forward with the vestibules. I think it was a little bit on a project by project basis. Maybe it wasn't as defined as some of the kitchen projects, but that's to be determined and ultimately implemented.
Okay.
Okay.
Air quality and HVAC improvements. Actually, I did want to stop here for a second. With the kitchens, with the entry vestibules, is there anybody who thinks we might have missed a point? Claire, your hand is okay. You just took it down.
Well, it's for later. Sorry.
Oh, you had a comment?
I had a comment at the end about what is missing, but I can wait.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, we'd like to get through this first. All right, so air quality and HVAC improvements. The clarification made here is that APS has been focused on air filtration in classes, but but whatever they need to, further purify the air or improve the air quality in classrooms for reopening in the fall would not fall under this. This is purely a continuation of planned maintenance. I would think it's very much in line with the county managers and the county's prioritization of, maintaining things or improving things that are at the end of their useful life. And so what I think we've heard is that's what these HVAC improvements actually are.
I think that, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say Jeff Chambers has his hand up, so it must be to comment on this.
Okay.
Yes, I just wanted to add, there is an item we are looking at doing as part of the CIP, and that is we have taken care of classrooms with the certified air cleaning devices, the CACDs. And what we're looking at doing in the funds that we're putting under that particular item are to provide larger units in larger spaces that would have HEPA filtration to improve the air quality throughout the building. So there are additional units that we're looking at doing. We would continue to maintain the CACDs in the classrooms and the small spaces that we have, but we would also be adding some units to the buildings that needed it. Where we didn't have the fresh air, we're going to provide the air quality through filtration, which is the other way to do it. But we would be putting in high capacity HEPA filtration units, say in the cafeterias, auditoriums, gyms, etc., that don't, the blue or the CACDs are not sized to be able to do. And that would hold the buildings with better air quality until we did have the projects to replace systems to improve the ventilation systems that were buildings that have been identified that need it, and also to probably replace the systems to increase the recirculation units that would better filter the air with, say, MERV 13s. Because going forward, our standard will be MERV 13s in the filtrations and providing fresh air to the current standard that is required. Some of our buildings meet the standard of when they were built, not today's current standard. So there's two major things that were identified in the study, which were the fresh air amounts that were brought in, as well as the filtration. And we use a balance of both to be able to meet the air quality within the building, filtration and/or fresh air. So just wanted to provide that clarification.
Thank you. Thank you.
So
turf fields.
Well, on this, do we have the same feedback that the groups are generally supportive of kind of this approach? I guess so. Again, I just, as this is presented, we don't want to inadvertently lack clarity here because there'll be a vocal, I think a minority, but I think there'll be a vocal group they'll be arguing for an acceleration of HVAC work at the schools. And we just need to be clear of what exactly the proposal is. So that's my main point here. And it sounds like from the group, I didn't hear anyone arguing for that no, we should be accelerating the life cycle maintenance and upgrading of HVACs. Okay.
Well, with Jeff's most recent information, I had come into this meeting believing that the air quality was at a specific level in all the schools, and it sounds to me like maybe they're not. They might be at the levels that were acceptable at the time they were built, but they are not necessarily the same as some of the other schools. At this time, I'm not going to bucket. I think if everybody else is fine with that, we'll move on. Colleen Pickford, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering, as we wrap up here, does it make sense to reflect back on some of the major projects that the county put out last night? Because I know we touched upon it earlier, but does it make sense for this group? Especially because they're looking at places where there's increased density and growth, and they're planning for that. Does it make sense to align the two as we provide feedback and recommendations?
It does. I was thinking that would come at the end, but if you want to, we can, certainly take your comment now. We wanted to get through the topics covered in APS's CIP to indicate, if we had additional questions. Generally, supported or didn't. That is, I've been told, useful feedback to the school board members. But if you could just restate your comment, Colleen.
No, my comment was really just as they're, the county CIP looked at things like Crystal City's parks and public space. There's a lot of growth going on there. And I think as they're looking at those public spaces and parks and the increased density that's coming to some of those areas, we should be looking at how we can provide school spaces and how that growth can be managed together too. But I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were going to go to that at the end. I just wanted to make sure.
No, that's fine. I mean, we'll take it now. Okay, great. Thank you. Turf fields, I think, is you, John. How would you summarize any sort of conversation? I mean, we don't have to address every one of these if we don't want to.
I didn't hear any opposition to moving forward with this joint investment on these sites. I didn't hear any in our FAC meeting, so I think there's general support for this also.
I did hear a question though, and it's a question that goes back to Williamsburg Lighting and where there was Williamsburg Lighting was sort of punted. That decision was punted because we were supposed to come up with standards or guidelines for when a field is or isn't lighted. And I think the question back would be, and I'm not remembering, what those standards are. Have we come up with those standards? And at what point do we go back and then look at the fields that have not had lighting and make an assessment as to whether or not they should? Because certainly lighting fields extends their usefulness, or their use, I should say.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can certainly make that comment.
Yep.
Major infrastructure projects for the upkeep of schools and operations. That's the MCMM. I think the school board has had a policy for a number of years now that this makes a lot of sense. At one point, probably 10 to 15 years ago, I think we were woefully underfunded for this sort of thing. And it's important that we obviously keep up the schools that we have. We didn't discuss it though.
So let me, this is confusing. So when we say for staff, when we're talking about this is really what the HVAC improvements fall under, correct? This is not exactly MCMM, which is funded out of operational funds, I believe.
Ben has his hand up.
Yeah, John, that's correct. Thanks for making that clarification. So this line item, it's called major infrastructure projects in the CIP. It really is sometimes confused with MCMM, which is a component of the operating budget. These are bonds that are sold to make investments in building infrastructure, such as HVAC replacements, roofs, windows, lighting, upgrades, things of that nature.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification.
Absolutely.
So Kathleen, this is Claire. Sorry, I'm jumping in because I I was going to hold my comment towards the end about what's not here, but some of those things would fit into here. So I don't know how you want to.
Go ahead, Claire.
So one of the things that I know FAC has discussed in the past, and it's kind of an ongoing project, is the rollout of solar panels on roofs. And I did not see anything in this CIP that discussed that, addressed that. And in particular, one thing that I'm mindful of is that I believe that with increased fresh air exchange in the proposed HVAC, there might be higher energy costs in terms of heating and cooling overall. And so having something like solar on rooftops long term, would that help reduce energy costs? And that's not really being addressed in the CIP going forward. And so that in my mind, my feedback would be there are a few things missing from the CIP that I would like to maybe mention. Maybe it should be. So it's not just a comment about what's in there, but also a comment of what's not in there.
Do you want to, I mean, it sounds like you might have a list. Do you want to mention them?
Did Ben have his hand up to answer or respond to what I said, or? Sorry.
Did you, Ben?
Yeah, so just the reason the solar projects are not part of the capital plan is we perform those projects under in agreement with a vendor, so that we essentially lease our roof space to the vendor. So those panels are installed and provided at no cost to APS. So that program is ongoing and is very active. We're about ready to energize Kenmore Middle School and W&L High School this week and next week, and we're working on several other schools. So that initiative is being pursued, and that's kind of why you're not seeing it in the capital plan.
Sorry, I should have been more specific. Solar ready roof. So I believe, for example, like Swanson's roof is not solar ready. So is that something that we could see as part of a major infrastructure project to get all of the roofs solar ready, for example? That would be, sorry, that's what I was trying to mention.
Gotcha. So in that case, yeah, that major infrastructure projects line item could be used to upgrade the roof or to replace the roof, because the roof, you're correct, does have to have a certain quality and substance to it before we add the solar panels to it.
So I would, in whatever formal role this would be, I would propose that we include something just highlighting maybe the need or the preference, or hey, don't just forget about this, of getting our school, having a plan to get our school's roofs solar ready. That would be a proposed recommendation I'm bringing up. Kathleen, you asked what else. The other thing is talking about outside covered space for eating. That is something that is a huge topic right now among parents, and it has been a real sort of a bonus in some ways of having COVID, where students are now allowed to eat outside for lunch, and it turns out that for a lot of students that is very beneficial for a lot of different reasons. And I don't know that that's going to necessarily be something we don't want to make some infrastructure investments in terms of covered outdoor space going forward. I know the county is going to look at trying to lend technical support and possibly a little bit of money to do some temporary tents and for some sites, but that may be something else I'm not seeing listed here, and I'd be happy to, if other people think, no, it's a terrible idea, but from everything I'm hearing from parents, it's a pretty positive quirk in, post-COVID life. And just wanted to mention that as well.
My only question for staff is whether that would rise the level of CIP and be eligible for bond funding, or whether that would be more of a MCMM or operational type project.
I would say more than likely that's going to be an MCMM project. Definition of a capital improvement project in the CIP is something that's usually $500,000 or more. And I would imagine that a covered area for eating during the day would be something less than that.
Okay, so $500,000, even if it was at multiple locations, is the $500,000 per location, or are you thinking that even at multiple locations, it would still come in under $500,000?
Typically, it's $500,000 for one.
Got it. Thank you. Thanks. Okay.
Thank you. John, did you want to take the Heights building, parking, and fields?
Sure. This has been kind of a hot topic over the past year or two. There was, I'd say, pretty strong pushback against the proposals. I've lost track whether it was a year ago, I guess. Given what Jeff said, it sounds like we're really talking about a marginal cost over what is required anyway. The marginal cost to provide parking is only another, I think he said, a couple of million. That we're going to have to spend something like 10 million anyway because of other issues. If that's the case, I don't think I heard, I think I had heard general support for this, but it's another one that needs to be well explained because there will be some initial pushback to this, especially given budget constraints. Did I summarize that accurately, Jeff? I think so.
Yes, you did. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for people who just do straight math, 75 parking spaces divided into $13 million is about 173,000 per parking space. That seems a little high. So, understanding what else, this entails is important.
It's critical because when it was just pitched, when it was just kind of thought of as 10 million, 12 million for parking, it was basically no. The opposition was pretty, and this was even before COVID fully hit. But given that there needs to be an investment for other reasons, and the marginal cost is only a couple of million, I think that I think we have more support for that. If people feel differently, please speak up.
Steve has his hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify my point, and then the group can move on. So the numbers that were provided by APS was $3.5 million for both options D1 and D2, which were essentially either just the field with some sort of covered walkway, or a partial field with a partial parking lot in a covered parkway. The option that was being proposed with the 75 parking spots in the structured parking came in at about $12.5 million. And I'm not passing any kind of judgment on what the value of those needs are at the Heights. My point is that given the uncertainty, particularly at the Career Center and with projections in general, I don't find any compelling reason to include that in the CIP.
So what's Jeff, what's the minimum that needs to be spent to get the, well, that's not an easy question to answer. I'm sorry. There's a number.
I think we can bring forward, everything that's said about this, that's been said about this. I know where you're going, but we need another whole meeting probably for that. And in terms of the new Career Center proposal, I think we heard some concerns around the fact that we don't know what it's going to cost. We don't necessarily know, everything it's going to entail, whether it will actually come in at the 185 million that was being anticipated. There are other dependencies in terms of, in terms of the phasing. And all those things will cost money as well. It does seem that, the using the space at the Fenwick building, by actually removing the Fenwick building might be a popular idea. And I mean, certainly it was asked repeatedly during both the Career Center Working Group and the BLPC. I would just note that it's very, very important, again, thinking about an equity lens. I think it's very important that we don't just keep moving these students, the Arlington High School, community high school students around. They've been moved quite a bit. So if they're going to go somewhere else, if we're going to take their building and raise it, let's put them in a place, in a situation where, it's a better situation. It provides more opportunities for exposure to internships and, other opportunities. It's closer to metro or closer to, closer to good transportation or different transportation options. I think all of that will be important, especially given the students who are at in attending Arlington Community High School, many of whom also, work to help support their families. So that's what I think I heard. Any comments, or did I miss anything? Okay. So John, next steps. I think you and I have to write something.
I think so. We've got the working session on the 25th, I think.
Right.
So
yeah.
I think we've got a blueprint for that.
Mm-hmm.
And,
terrific.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody for all your good comments, your good thinking about this, for coming very prepared to the meeting. It certainly cut off a lot of the time and that we might have spent on, less substantive questions. And so thank you very much. John, you want to wrap us up?
Thank you. It was helpful to me and I think FAC members. It's important to know that I think Leslie outlined kind of some of the constraints we have. So we need to be cognizant of that. I do think that in this environment, we need to be a little bit careful to not lead with a proposal for a $200 million career center. The timing of this doesn't sound right to me, given the other needs and the constraints and the uncertainties. But I think there's parts of the career center that are worth pursuing sooner rather than later. I think the other parts of the CIP are well thought out. They're more discrete. They're easier chunks, easier bites to swallow. They're needed. They do get at equity issues. But I do want to point out that the more we spend on any one item, whether it's a career center or heights or air quality, whatever it is, the less that'll be available for the things that we didn't talk about today. I can say pre-COVID, I think we were moving in a direction where we really wanted to renovate and add to a number of the smaller, older elementary schools that happen to sit in the Western Columbia Pike area, where the need, we believe, will be greatest going forward. There's just not going to be the ability to address those comprehensively. I think there are some smaller pieces that can help improve those facilities. But in terms of major renovations or complete tear downs, that's just not going to be possible. The other thing we were thinking of last year was swing space. One of the issues we have at APS is we can't vacate a building to gut it and to redo it, which ideally we'd love to do that. We'd vacate a building for a year and a half and then completely redo it and maybe add on. Since we have no swing space, we can't really do that now. So there's a real constraint that's impacted us. So the reason I raise this is there are many things that we'd like to do that we haven't even talked about here. And maybe that's why I'm being so careful about this major project of the Career Center right now. But I think we've got, it was helpful. I think we've got pretty good discussion points for the working session for the board, the APS board, to be productive. And for the FAC members, if I've gotten anything on your views or our colleagues' views in your minds that isn't quite accurate, please, to contact me, let me know. I try to speak for all of the board. And in some cases I'll say, here's the majority view, here's unanimity. But I try not to just speak for myself. So if you disagree with me anything or have other thoughts that we put forward here, or something we haven't even discussed that you think is a real pressing item, please let me know, and I'll try to bring it to Kathleen also before the 25th.
Yes, in fact, I encourage everybody, if something strikes you, or we didn't get your item, we didn't reiterate the item that you brought up, please let us know. Just send us an email. It certainly will help us when we start to do this letter. And I do think people who brought up things outside of the specific CIP, the what's missing question, because those are all, important things to raise as well. So just last word, I guess, is thank you all very much to all the staff who were here on both the APS and the county side. Lisa and Robert and Leslie, thank you. And Michelle, and let's see, Sarah, Matt. Am I missing? Oh, obviously, Mr. Gregory, wonderful to meet you. Thank you for spending time with us tonight. Michael DePalma and Jeff Chambers and Ben Bergen. We greatly appreciate your expertise and all your willingness to help inform us and explain the elements of the CIP. Thank you. All right, have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Kathleen.
Thanks, John.
Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Lisa.